I suspect I've been developing a charging issue on my car over the past couple years. This alternator is a replacement. It's got over 100,000 miles on it, and its running voltage has been slowly decreasing over time. Battery's got a healthy voltage sitting here at rest. Engine cranks up nicely. 14.1 at idle. That's in spec. If I go kick on some accessories, blower, headlights, high beams, rear defrost, drops a tiny bit, add in the air conditioning. Pressure switch just kicked the fan on. 13.85 of the battery. That's still doing all right. Rev it up a little bit. Now that's interesting. Raise it off idle, and it actually drops the voltage a little bit. It's regulating just a little bit lower than I expected, and this is with a fairly cold engine and a cold alternator. I'll check back once it's warmed up. Got back from running some errands. Everything's up to temperature, a little bit heat soaked. Healthy battery voltage. Nice good crank. Charging voltage is a little bit lower, but not by a whole lot. Similar behavior before, where it actually drops a tiny bit when the RPMs are raised. For sake of consistency, get the lights, rear defrost, fan, air conditioning on. Drops, but not by a crazy amount. We'll wait for the radiator fan to kick on for the AC condenser. And there it is. Still, this is on the low end of where it wants to be when charging. And if it stays the same or even lower at cruise, that would explain why it sometimes seems like it's not quite fully charging the battery, even after a longer trip. Because the charging voltage is fairly well maintained, just lower than expected, putting aside the small drop when the RPMs rise, it makes me think that the regulator is a little bit out of spec, lazy, worn out. It's over 100,000 miles old, so can't exactly blame it. To satisfy my own curiosity, I took my car to a local parts store and had them test the charging system. The 8-year-old battery measured good, but in need of charging. The kicker is, the night before I'd fully topped it off with a plug-in charger, and I'd been driving around for a while before running errands. There's no reason the battery should have been that run down. So it said battery good, charge battery, even though I suspect that battery wasn't holding a charge very well. Starting system passed, the charging system, the alternator failed. Regulation good, diodes passed, so the ripple current was in spec, but charging current failed. I believe the charging current test is similar to the battery test where it puts a snap load of a couple hundred amps on it for a second or two. In this case, it wasn't able to keep up, and the voltage sagged out of spec. For that, I picked up a new regulator. It's much cheaper than a reman or a new alternator, and on this car, it is possible to change the regulator without having to pull the alternator out. To remove the alternator outright involves removing the air pipe for the ECU box, draining the coolant just enough to remove the upper radiator hose, taking off the serpentine belt, unbolting the power steering pump and folding it up over out of the way, and then taking the alternator off. It's not the worst thing in the world, but this aftermarket power steering pump has a slight tolerance issue for the position of the bolt holes. Taking it off is easy. Putting it back, I might be here for a few hours to get everything to line up. Of course, after the testing, everything in here is pretty warm. I don't exactly want to have my hands pressed against all of that hot metal, so it's going to take a little bit to cool down. I'll be back. One whoosh of a time skip later, and the car is largely cooled down, as well as being inside the garage. Block itself is still a little bit warm, but the intake and the area around the alternator, those are plenty cool enough to work with safely. Always unhook the battery before working on major electrical components on a vehicle. Looking down at the back of the alternator between the high-pressure power steering line and the intake manifold, there's the main B+ stud and its nut and the charging cable. Directly beneath that is the connection for the exciter and also the charging system warning light. For easier access, I'm pulling the cooling duct off the ECU enclosure, unclips from there, and unclips from the radiator shroud. The B+ connection is a 13mm nut on the stud, I'm using a socket, short wobble extension, and a ratchet to break it loose. It should not be crazy tight, but if it's extremely loose, that could be the source of voltage drop problems. Once it's broken loose, the nut should unscrew by hand. I know this area is in good shape and recently cleaned. Since I was chasing the low charging voltage problem, I investigated all of the other connections in the chain before starting to suspect the regulator. There's the nut. And then the B+ cable pops off. Right underneath is the charging warning light and exciter connection. Spade terminal simply slides off. For better access, I'm going to snip the zip tie holding the coolant temperature sensor connector. Took 2 hands to unclip the connector for the sensor. That's in the same bundle with the B+ and the exciter wire. All of those can kind of be tucked over here behind the dipstick tube. This exposes the Phillips head screws holding the plastic shroud over the diode and regulator assembly. There is 1, 2, and 3. An extra stubby screwdriver works well to get in there. The screws are coarse threaded. I think they're going into plastic. Once they're a few turns loose, easy to get them moving the rest of the way by hand. There are also 3 clips holding the shroud on. This one's easily visible up top. I have to get the other 2, which are on the side and the bottom, so may not be able to get footage. That bottom clip needed a small amount of encouragement with the flathead before it came loose. The cover itself is also a little bit stiff. I'm very carefully, of course, as I was saying, very carefully putting the blade of the flathead between the metal frame of the alternator and the shroud, just gently twisting to encourage it to move. After a small amount of wiggling, you can see it's working out. This has to slide off of the studs, and that's just about free, though I might need an extra hand to get it all the way out. The shroud's pretty reluctant to come out all the way without removing stuff like the upper oil cooler hose, since this is the turbo model, and the dipstick tube, but folding it down out of the way nicely exposes the slip rings and the regulator. Also worth noting that the B+ terminal passes through this metal bushing in the shroud, with another contact point further along the stud there. This inner contact could also be a potential source of bad connection. Not in this case, you can see how it's clean and shiny. My previous research suggested the regulator would be held by Phillips head screws, though in my case, it's held by 2 E5 external torque screws. These are not exceedingly tight. The tiniest driver I have breaks them loose in a fraction of a turn. Brushes are spring-loaded, so once one of the screws come out, you'll notice the regulator will want to pop up a little bit. With the screws loose, the regulator practically jumped out of its spot. It's a good thing I had the shroud underneath, because it acted as a tray to catch it. You can see the slip rings there, and a spring-loaded contact. Those all look to be in pretty good shape. Nothing looks too scorched or pitted or anything. We'll be double checking and cleaning everything up in there before I put the new regulator on. Old regulator has some dirt and wear on it, but nothing's really jumping at me. There's a little bit of corrosion on this terminal, but I still see shiny metal, so that by itself probably wouldn't be an issue. Brushes do have some wear on them, but they're nice and smooth, they're not torn to shreds, plenty of meat, and they both move freely in their slots. Side by side, these regulators are physically the same item. Connections in the same place, resistor in the same place, brush spacing, all of that. Maybe a third to half the brushes on the old one have worn away, so it's definitely showing that it's got 100,000 plus miles on it. Another interesting difference. The package here is smaller on the old one than on the new one. Part numbers are different. This one's made in Great Britain, the new one is made in Taiwan. Gently cleaned and polished all of the contact surfaces. Check the slip rings. They're nice and smooth, I can't feel any sort of lip with my fingernail. Should be good to reassemble. When removing a regulator, the springs want to make it jump off. When putting it back, you're fighting to compress the springs in order to get it in place. One thing I am noticing, the spring pressure on the new one is much stiffer than the old one. Now I need to push it into place all the way and get the lower bolt in. Regulator in place, bolts are still finger tight. Making sure the brushes line up on the slip rings and all the contacts are seated in the right spot. They really don't need to be crazy tight. I'm using my ultra compact ratchet, just snugging them up, and that should be good. Putting the shroud back is a matter of aligning it with the stud and the tabs, working it back on, and massaging it until the clips click in. The 3 screws for the shroud should start easily by hand. Screws tighten down all the way with the stubby screwdriver. Again, they don't have to be super tight, just snug enough to keep the shroud on. Warning light connected to its spade terminal, and main cable on the B+ stud. Is there a torque spec? Yes. Do I have any torque wrenches that would actually fit and work in this tight space? No. Have to hook the coolant temperature sensor back up or the ECU is going to scream at me. Then the negative cable, just gonna bump it in case something wants to go boom. Tiniest little pop of capacitors charging up in the various modules. Get the hat on. We should be ready to start. Here we go. Fires right up. Interesting. Same charge voltage as before. Curious to see what it does as things warm up. Next day at warm idle, much higher voltage than before. Same as previous tests. Headlights, high beams, blower, AC, rear defrost. Get all the loads on. Small amount of voltage drop. Once more, going to wait for the cooling fan to kick in for the condenser. Fan at full bore. And still not a capacity problem. It's regulating at this 13.74, 13.73. When I rev it up, voltage does not change, which means that's exactly where the alternator wants to be right now. Took the car back to the same parts store for another round of testing after the new regulator and the new battery. Here's what we got now. State of charge, 100%. Starting system still good, and charging system now measures good. Charging current passed, and difference this time versus last time. When it did the charging current test, there was a noticeable momentary bog in the idle as the alternator was put under sudden heavy load and the engine had to compensate. It did not do that before, suggesting the old regulator was not allowing the alternator to go to full field, even when presented with a heavy load. Another interesting thing I realized during all of this, in fact what precipitated me checking the charging system in the first place, was my scan gauge here reads 1/10 or 2 of a volt lower than what the actual battery voltage is. Something's up with this, because it's consistent whether the engine's off or running. Been driving around for a few days, and so far so good. Everything's working great. I probably could have gotten away with a weak alternator and a failing battery for a while longer, though the mild weather around here can really disguise those issues until it's too late. Battery will crank the engine fine one time, maybe a little bit slow, and then the next time, completely flat, no chance of starting. I didn't want that to sneak up on me, so the battery replacement was preemptive. Alternator likewise could have limped along for quite a while. Plenty of meat on the brushes, no indication that it was about to completely go out. I wasn't satisfied with the output I was getting. I guess I was right, considering that the replacement regulator is working so much better. I put the old battery through a handful of exercise cycles and desulfation procedures, and it still didn't really come back all the way. It charges up rapidly, but doesn't seem to actually fill all the way up. The resting voltage after a charge is 12.45 to 12.55 volts instead of 12.6, 0.7, 0.8 like I'd expect. It definitely does not hold a surface charge like it used to, so something's definitely wrong there. Usable as a 12-volt bench source, but really not much else. While this job is plenty accessible for a DIYer, unless you got small hands like me, you may need to remove a few extra things in the engine compartment there. The upper oil cooler hose to the radiator on a turbocharged model, maybe the upper radiator hose just to get the angle to get in there. I was able to do it without too much trouble or cursing, but your mileage may vary. As of right now, everything's working great, so one less thing to worry about on this old car. Thanks for watching, see you next time.